All right. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate being able to have the opportunity to come and speak at this thing. I've been coming to these conferences now since, I want to say, 2012. So, like back in the EPIS days, that's kind of when I started doing these. So, when I first started coming to these things, I was new to energy, new to production cost modeling, and now, a few gray hairs later, a couple pounds heavier, I come back, and I'm the old guy in the back talking about the good old days. So thank you for letting me talk about this. So I work for MAN Energy Solutions. We're a part of the Volkswagen Group. Not to get too much into this because that'll just lead to more questions. I think more interesting than the fact that we work for Volkswagen is just the wide array of components that we provide that can be coupled or grouped together to make real-world energy solutions. So we provide heat pumps, carbon capture, electrolyzers, engines for power production and also for propulsion of ships, retrofit opportunities for services, and even not included here is our methanation reactors. The cool part about my job is that I'm able to play with coupling and grouping all of our components together to be able to solve real world problems. And I think what's interesting here, especially with this collection of folks in here, is that we really get to get the creative juices flowing in terms of how we can really use all of these solutions and use the production cost modeling softwares to be able to try and figure out how to answer questions for tomorrow. When I was putting this stuff together, usually when I come and I give these talks, I try to have some type of an example to step away from math and all of this stuff that you nerds do, right? And move it more towards like real world application. And usually I talk about sports or stuff like that, but when I'm thinking about where we're moving now in terms of this energy transition and all of the constraints and the limitations of resources, I went back to my childhood and I tried to pull from those experiences. I grew up in Philadelphia, and when I was young, my grandmother and I, we used to go to the Amish market, an Amish meat market in downtown Philly, and she'd get a couple pounds of bacon. And she'd cook breakfast a couple times a week in one of those big cast iron skillets. And then what she'd do is she'd take the bacon grease and she'd put it in the mason jar. And then she'd use that bacon grease for shortening for biscuits or maybe to fry some chicken up or something like that. And I'm not telling you all this just to get you guys thinking about eating unhealthy, but more so to think about to get the creative juices flowing. How can we recycle, reuse, and replace things that would have been wasted to be able to reapply them to make a good finished product? If you think about where we are now, we're kind of in uncharted territory. We're in a space now where we had a few talks here discussing resource adequacy and new capacity accreditation methodologies. And we're in a space now where we don't have a lot of capacity to be able to meet demand. And demand is only growing every year. And if you look kind of over here on the right side of the chart, on the right side of the graph here, or slide, you see on the x-axis you have the number of the amount of time in months that a project goes into the interconnection queue until it can be realized in terms of COD. If you look on this chart here, you're seeing that, all right, well, there's going to be huge capacity shortfalls and huge reliability issues starting as early as 2025, this year. Projects that are going into the interconnection queue now to solve these problems, some of these things, like if you look at MISO and an SPP, some of these things are a minimum of 3 years in the interconnection queue. That's not accounting for the excessive lead times on items like power plants or transformers. So how are we going to go about solving this problem where we have growing demand and then you have all of the buzz on data centers and all of this good stuff, how are we going to be able to couple all of these things together and still be able to provide power in a reliable and affordable way? You gotta use that bacon grease, and this is what we're talking about here. The lines are starting to become more blurred between electrical, industrial, and commercial sectors. So being able to couple sectors across industrial lines is going to be critical for being able to recycle again and reuse and repurpose things that could have been wasted into actual energy end products. So if we think about just heating and cooling for a second, heating and cooling accounts for 51% of all of energy consumption, and it accounts for 40% of CO2 emissions in the world. 51% of energy consumption, just so you know, electricity accounts for only 25%. So this is pretty massive. Now, if we think about where the emissions comes from for heating and cooling, a lot of times it comes from you have a gas boiler, right? And the gas boiler, if you think about Con Ed, for example, I mean, they have tons of boilers in New York that emit stuff, and those boilers are utilized to send heat and steam into a district energy network. That's a very CO2 intensive process, right? And that's just Con Edison. There's other utilities around the United States and around the world that have the same type of profile. So the question becomes, how can we couple electric and thermal needs into one ecosystem to be able to reduce CO2 emissions and also to mitigate some of these risks and challenges that come from these constraints? We're going to walk through a real-world example. So we have one of the other cool parts of my job is I get to interact with folks like you that are trying to solve these problems, and they give me a call. Hey, Brian, what's up? What do you think about this? I don't know. Give me a couple of weeks to play around with PLEXOS, and I'll turn you back an answer. That's one of the cool parts of my job. So this actually happened with a real-world customer in Chile. Customer reaches out to us, and he says, okay, well, we got a problem. We have increasing electrical and thermal demand. Lead time items are extremely long, and we need to be able to reduce our CO2 emissions. Here's what our portfolio looks like. We have a PPA, a shaped PPA that comes from an IPP that this IPP is shaping wind and solar for us to be able to utilize. We have our own solar on the ground, and we have a gas boiler that's there to be able to provide to serve our thermal needs. I said, okay, well, here's what we'll do. We'll look at whether or not, we're going to look at the value of electrification. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all of your thermal demand and couple that with your electrical demand, and we're going to try to meet that with the heat pump. So we did an analysis, and we did a couple scenarios. So you got the base case, and then we did the PPA and the solar, and we replaced the gas boiler with the heat pump. And then we did another case where we had the PPA with the heat pump, and there's obviously periods of time where some solar would be curtailed, and it says, okay, well, this solar is being curtailed, so let's throw a battery on the back end of it. Key takeaways from everything is the battery didn't really add much value, so we're not going to walk through the solutions that from that. The CapEx didn't necessarily justify the savings. So what happened is, well, we saw that replacing the heat pump with the gas boiler, increasing the electrical load, right, and eliminating the thermal load, we got about $48 million per annum in savings. And what that translated to was about 2.5 years on return on investment. This thing paid for itself in 2.5 years. The heat pump increased the peak demand to 71 megawatts from 38. So we just about doubled what the electrical load would be, but we completely eliminated the thermal load. So 643 gigawatts of electricity supplied, but more importantly is all of the CO2 emissions were completely eliminated from the system because we took out the gas boiler and we made everything electrical load. And these are just a few of the assumptions here. So you see, does this have the little pointer thing? I don't know, but so we see here kind of what the electrical load looked like in the base case, and versus what the total load would have been when we added the thermal and electrical together. On the bottom, we just have what the thermal demand was in the base case and what it was realized to be. Let's see, in terms of prices, we're assuming that the PPA price, you got to remember that this isn't necessarily the competitive, when we talk about these mining applications, this isn't the competitive market like it is in the US, where you have all of these different IPPs working and competing on projects. So it's typically one supplier that's able to provide electricity prices, or that's where that $100 per megawatt hour PPA comes from. Obviously that wouldn't fly here in the US, but when you limit it to only one supplier, this is typically the type of pricing that you'll see. Gas is $15 per MMBTU. This was Henry Hub was kind of the base, and then we're looking at probably about $9 to $10 for transport because it was LNG. CO2 was calculated. CO2 emissions were calculated based on the assumption that natural gas, when burned, levies about 116 pounds of CO2, pounds per MMBTU. One pound of CO2 is emitted for every MMBTU of gas that's burned. We did some stuff in PLEXOS that I think was pretty interesting here. So in order to make this happen, just to give a little bit of context around how heat pumps work, right? I'm pretty sure some of you guys already know, but from a modeling context, we had to model a heat pump that had about a 3 coefficient of performance. And for those who don't know, a coefficient of performance is the measure of efficiency for a heat pump. How many megawatts of electrical energy do I have to put in to get thermal megawatts out? So 1 megawatt of electricity is going to give me, in this case, to be exact, 3.59 megawatts of thermal out. In order to make that happen, I had to, of course, optimize the power and the heat networks in PLEXOS. And I had to start off by using the power to X functionality within the model. One of the challenges with using the power to X model, and I wonder if this is something that can be improved upon, wink, 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 you're only allowed to max out at 100% efficiency. So what that means is I can only get a COP of 1 when I'm modeling a heat network. So I had to use the custom constraint module to be able to get those other 2.59 units of coefficient of performance. So we had to develop a custom constraint here that we called the heat pump COP boost. So really simple constraint. No need to walk through it, but you have the load coefficient from the power to X module and the heat production coefficient from the heat model. From the heat module, you couple them together, and now I have those other 2 units of coefficient of performance to be able to run the simulation. And then lastly, just to show it some, typically, in my experience, a lot of the PLEXOS users that I've come across use the gas module, use the power module. There's not a lot of folks that use the heat module. So I just wanted to show just a little bit how this works. So Obviously, there's connections between power to X, the constraint, and then the actual heat pump. And here we just have a generic heat pump here, and we linked the power to X module with the heat pump module, and this is how this is represented here. This is just some simulated dispatch of how the system worked from a baseline perspective. We had kind of in the uncoupled system, we had the PPA, the solar kind of meeting the electrical demand. The electrical demand, by the way, comes from actually heating and cooling the facility, as well as the living space for all of the workers that are on the mine. So these mines they're like small communities, they're cities. So there's robust electrical demand that needs to be met. And then the ventilation of the mine, typically that comes from big cooling fans, that's where all of that electrical load comes from. The heat demand, that actually comes from the actual process heat that's needed to actually extract the minerals, right? So that's why right now currently the systems are decoupled. Here's what this thing looked like in the end. When we're looking at the simulated energy mix, kind of on the far right of the graph here, you have your PPA plus PV, you have your thermal load, and you have the gigawatt hours that are being produced, and then you have this. How do I go back here? And then you have this. You have the thermal load, so about 1 point. I don't know, let's just call it 1,200 gigawatt hours of thermal load being provided just for heating. And then look at what happens when you couple them together. So you have about 600 megawatts of electrical load altogether. What that translates into is almost, in terms of net present value, like the cost of the base case is almost twice that of what the case is with the heat pump. What's interesting about this chart is this is accounting for CapEx of almost $100 million for the heat pump solution, and what's being shown there in the blue, there is no CapEx. This is all OpEx. So the savings are paramount. It's in the first 3 years, it's really about 2.5 years, you're going to get $122 million in savings. So even before you get to the deep into the amortization of the CapEx, it's fully paid for well beyond the time that'll meet its economic life. So that's one of the things that we're working on, and one of the other pretty cool things that we're working on, and where I don't have anything, this is relatively new, I don't have anything simulated to present here, but this will kind of be around too, is with all of the solutions that we're able to couple together, sometimes we're able to kind of piecemeal some things together that can be really, really cool. We have this electrothermal energy storage solution that is based off of our heat pump, but it can provide short, mid, and long duration energy storage for utilities, for commercial and industrials, and I think more importantly here, for data centers. Data centers, as you all know, they produce a lot of heat. So one of the big energy consumers there is the cooling of the data center. And what this solution allows us to do is it allows us to either use the heat from the data center as as process air to be able to power district energy networks or to make ice, or we could use a data center as a load, and it can protect system harmonics by being able to allow power systems to run at full load and balance the system with minimal disturbances. We're also looking at the idea, and we're doing this also in PLEXOS, where district energy systems, and this is a real world customer that's looking at us doing this in the U.S. District energy customers are saying, hey, we have heat pumps, we have steam turbines, and we have connection to the grid. Can we utilize the stored heat and steam, hot water and steam, to be able to run a steam turbine to provide ancillary services to ISO markets? We actually have an application that we're evaluating right now in Germany, where our heat pumps are providing regulating and spinning reserves to the local TSO in Germany, and we are looking to expand this study to see how this could work also in the United States. That's it. Thank you. Yeah.
Is that something that Volkswagen makes?
So MAN, yeah, so we will be able to provide 90% of everything that's inside battery limits for that. So the primary mover for that, of course, is the heat pump, and the way that ETES system works is, it's the Rankine cycle. So you have a heat pump that's using CO2 as working fluid, and as that CO2 goes through its compression and expansion cycles, it's creating heat, and it's creating hot heat and cold heat, and through that process, you're able to add a power turbine or a CO2 turbine that can rotate as that process fluid is going through those different cycles. Yep. Anything else?
All right, thank you, Brian.
Yep, thank you.